Autumn 1981. Amid the height of the Cold War, a top-secret file suddenly surfaced in Paris. It wasn't a routine report, but a detailed list of hundreds of Soviet operatives' hidden networks that had infiltrated Western laboratories, factories, and defense institutions. It was given a simple name, the Farewell Dossier. But behind it lay a decision from which there was no return. A KGB officer, standing in the heart of Paris, had chosen to betray the very system he had once sworn to serve. Vetrov walked away, melting into the Parisian crowd, yet deep inside, he knew this path had no way back. That single act didn't just shake the Soviet intelligence community. It ignited one of the largest counterintelligence operations of the 20th century, reshaping the balance of technology, trust, and ultimately the course of the Cold War. This is a story of trust, of ideals, and of betrayal. Born in 1932, Vetrov grew up in a Soviet Union still scarred by war, yet determined to rise against the West. He entered the KGB with ambition, intelligence, and loyalty, or at least the appearance of it. He worked in technical intelligence, gathering Western innovations for Soviet industry. His career brought him to postings abroad, including a stay in Canada, where he saw with his own eyes the prosperity of capitalist societies. To some KGB officers, such assignments reinforced their sense of duty, a conviction that the Soviet system had to be defended at all costs. But to Vetrov, the contrast left an enduring mark. Behind his professional exterior, he harbored doubts. He grew disillusioned, not just with the inefficiencies of the Soviet system, but with the corruption within the KGB itself. Bureaucratic rivalries, internal surveillance, the crushing weight of ideology. Vetrov found himself suffocating in a machine that demanded obedience but offered little recognition. He was intelligent, but not celebrated. Capable, but not trusted. His frustrations deepened into resentment, and resentment hardened into something far more dangerous, a decision to act. But his choice was not driven by idealism for the West. Vetrov was no Solzhenitsyn, no dissident writer raising his voice for human rights. Nor was he like Oleg Gordievsky, who aligned himself openly with British values. No, Vetrov's motives were tangled, conflicted. Some would say he acted out of anger, others from a desire to strike back at those who had humiliated him. Perhaps it was a personal rebellion disguised as espionage. Whatever the reason, the consequences would be monumental. His French handlers gave him the codename Farewell, a word that carried both simplicity and finality. Over the next year, the stream of documents he provided astonished Western intelligence. Technical manuals, project lists, internal reports, all revealing the scope of Soviet efforts to steal Western technology. The Soviet Union, unable to keep pace with the rapid innovation of the West, had turned its intelligence services into an engine of theft. From microchips to aerospace designs, from computers to radar systems, KGB officers and their networks scoured the globe for secrets, and Vetrov, from within, was exposing it all. The Farewell Dossier, as it became known, landed on the desk of François Mitterrand, the French president. In a private conversation with Ronald Reagan, Mitterrand shared the treasure. The Americans were stunned. For years, they had suspected the breadth of Soviet industrial espionage, but here was proof, undeniable and vast. Names, operations, targets laid bare. The Cold War was not only missiles and tanks, it was a war of circuits, satellites, and silicon. And now, the United States and its allies held the keys. What followed was one of the most remarkable counterintelligence campaigns of the 20th century. Rather than simply rolling up the Soviet networks, an action that would have tipped Moscow off immediately, Washington and Paris decided to play a deeper game. Western companies, in coordination with intelligence services, began feeding doctored technologies to Soviet agents. On the surface, the stolen blueprints and software looked authentic, valuable, but hidden within were flaws, deliberate weaknesses that would cripple systems once deployed. In 1982, a massive explosion ripped through a section of the Trans-Siberian gas pipeline. To the world, it looked like an accident. But years later, reports would suggest otherwise. The software controlling the pipeline had been sabotaged, a Trojan gift carried unknowingly into Soviet systems. Whether the story is entirely accurate or not remains debated, but its symbolism endures. The Farewell Dossier had given the West not only knowledge, but a weapon. Yet, as with all intelligence operations, triumph came with cost. In Moscow, the KGB eventually sensed the breach. Paranoia spread. Who had betrayed them? Who had fed the West such devastating truths? In 1982, Vetrov's world began to unravel, not because of suspicion at first, but because of his own spiraling life. He drank heavily. He grew reckless. One night, during a violent quarrel, he stabbed his lover. Arrested by Soviet authorities, he was imprisoned for the crime. And it was within that confinement that the KGB finally pieced the puzzle together. The trail of betrayal led back to him. Interrogations followed, the evidence mounted, Vladimir Vetrov, codenamed Farewell, was unmasked. His fate was sealed. In 1983, he was executed, his body consigned to the silence of history. But history did not forget. The documents he delivered continued to shape Western strategy. Hundreds of Soviet officers were expelled from Europe, networks painstakingly built over years were dismantled. The Soviet Union found itself blinded in critical areas, deprived of the very technologies it so desperately sought. Some historians argue that the Farewell dossier accelerated the decline of Soviet power, weakening its economic and technological base at a moment when it could least afford setbacks. And yet, to tell this story as one of Western triumph alone is to miss its complexity. For within it lies a tragedy. A man who rose within the Soviet system, who might have lived out his days as an anonymous officer, instead became a pawn in a struggle far larger than himself. To Moscow, he was a traitor. To Paris and Washington, a valuable source. But stripped of ideology, what remains is a portrait of a man consumed by bitterness, caught between loyalty and rebellion, and ultimately destroyed by his own contradictions. The leaves of Butte Chaumont still fall each autumn. Couples still walk the paths, unaware of the secret meeting that once unfolded there. The world has moved on. The Soviet Union itself has vanished into history, but the echoes of that envelope, passed quietly from hand to hand on a Paris afternoon, still resonate. For in that moment, the Cold War shifted not with the roar of missiles, but with the whisper of betrayal. And Vladimir Vetrov, the man who called himself Farewell, remains one of the Cold War's most haunting figures.